That's the first thing this bill does. Another thing it does, by the way, is combating BDS Act of 2019. For those who are not familiar with the BDS, it's boycott, divestment, and sanction. It is an effort, by and large, to punish Israel. And to punish Israel by convincing companies, international companies, and others to boycott doing business with Israel or Israeli entities, to divest of investments in Israel or with Israeli entities, and convincing governments to sanction Israel. And so, this provision of the law does not outlaw boycott, divestment, and sanctions. If a United States company caves to this pressure and decides it's going to boycott or divest from Israel, they have the legal right to do so. This doesn't outlaw it. What it does say, however, it does say that if a state or local government decides that it's not going to do business, the government, is not going to issue contracts for goods or services with any company that is boycotting or divesting from Israel, they have a right to do that. I've heard the argument that this is about free speech. First of all, it's not about free speech. It's not about free speech, it's about foreign policy. And we'll talk about that more as the week goes on, but there's court cases out there that talk about well, this is not an effort to influence a domestic political debate or to speak or take action in the form of speech that influences a domestic political debate. This is about influencing the behavior of a foreign government. Influencing the behavior of a foreign government is foreign policy. And the courts give broad discretion to Congress and the President in the setting of our foreign policy. But put that aside for a moment. As I already told you, this doesn't in any way prevent anyone from participating in boycotting or divesting from Israel. All it says is that if you do, your clients in the form of state or local governments can boycott or divest you in return. Free speech is a two-way street. Beyond that, it makes it very clear in the law that nothing in this law should be construed, nothing, to violate anyone's First Amendment rights. So these are the two provisions that help Israel to prevent the sort of economic warfare that's being driven against them and to make clear to their adversaries that the United States stands ready to resupply and strengthen Israel's ability to defend itself.
Expect to a number of Democratic speeches on the shutdown.
Without objection.
Mr. President, just a few moments ago, we welcomed our newest colleague and my colleague from the state of Florida, our former governor, now U.S. Senator Rick Scott, who will do a phenomenal job here on behalf of the state of Florida. And I welcome him to the United States Senate, the world's greatest deliberative body, and on occasion, perhaps its strangest as well. For in about an hour and 15 minutes, the Senate is going to take up Senate Bill 1, which is a combination of 4 separate bills that enjoy widespread support in this chamber from colleagues on both sides of the aisle, all of them sponsored, co-sponsored by colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and apparently we will fail to get a significant number of votes to get on this bill nonetheless. So it is perhaps one of the few places on earth where people vote against things they are for reasons unrelated to the issue at hand. And I don't want to dig too deep into that. That'll be a topic for conversation later on, and maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe they'll change their mind here in the next hour and 15 minutes, and we'll be able to have the votes we need. But I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to say I'm upset about the government shutdown. By the way, the Senate voted to fund government, unanimous. We had a voice vote. We didn't even have a roll call vote. So this chamber's already acted in that regard. At this point now, it's incumbent on the leaders of the Democratic Party here in the Senate, combined with the White House, to come up with a deal to reopen government. This government shutdown is not good for anybody. It's not what I've never seen anybody win one of these. That said, I don't know why we would shut down the Senate, too, given the issues that we face. About 3 weeks ago, the President announced that the United States was withdrawing from our engagement in Syria. And I think the majority of people in the Senate believe that that decision was a mistake and is a mistake. And while I was certainly encouraged by some of the comments by the National Security Council Director, the head of the National Security Council, John Bolton, Ambassador Bolton, on sort of the pace and scale and scope of the withdrawal, nonetheless, there's been conflicting statements since then, which puts this all in question. And at the time he made this decision, We walked through all the reasons why this was a mistake, not because we want to be at war in Syria forever. That's false. Of course it has to come to an end, but it needs to come to an end in a way that's in the interest of the United States of America. And it is not in the interest of the United States of America to see ISIS reemerge the way they did after 2011 when the United States left Iraq. And when the U.S. left and pulled back its presence in Iraq, it allowed ISIS to reconstitute itself and reemerge. They were called something different then, but they were basically a spin-off of al-Qaeda. They started out as an insurgency and grew very rapidly. And they are larger today, and they are more powerful today than when they reconstituted themselves almost a decade ago. And so I have no doubt that if this moves forward, ISIS will reconstitute itself, maybe not as a caliphate, but as something equally dangerous, and that is an insurgency with the capability not just to create havoc, mayhem, murder, and destruction in Syria and potentially once again in Iraq, but also to externally plot and attack us here in the homeland. This raises all kinds of other possibilities, like the Iraqi troops, along with irregular forces sponsored by Iran, these Shia militias that have been on the ground in Iraq, coming across the border and into Syria. Obviously, we've all read and heard about the Turkish troops that want to come in into the Kurdish areas. By the way, if you're Assad and you're sitting there now, the U.S. is pulling out, you've got all this going on, and he probably figures at this point, what does he need a political solution for? What does he need the UN or anybody for? And the saddest part about that, of course, is that this diminishes the chances that Assad will ever have to face accountability for the crimes committed by his regime against innocent civilians and children, women, and others, through not just the gassing and the use of chemical weapons, but the widespread torture and murder. We'll discuss that more as the week goes on. Also concerned about Iran's growing influence, with the U.S. leaving, especially in southeast Iraq and on the border of Jordan and Israel. Hezbollah, other Iranian proxies, and Iran itself, with the IRGC and General Soleimani, who's a maven of murder in that area, basically doing whatever they want. More freedom of navigation, more freedom of movement, and a direct threat that it poses to both Israel and to Jordan. And by the way, when the Turks come in, when potentially Iraqi troops come in, when ISIS is reconstituted and starts killing people again, you're going to have new refugee flows. Maybe it'll be mostly Kurds this time, maybe folks from the Syrian Defense Forces who had fought alongside us for a while, and their families. But where are all these new refugees going to go? Potentially some will wind up in Jordan, further destabilizing or testing that country's ability to deal with all this. And one last point. Both the Kurds and the Syrian Defense Forces have an excess of 700 ISIS fighters in custody, imprisoned. Are they going to let them all go? Because without us there supporting them, I don't know how they hold them. And none of the countries they came from want them back. So you could potentially face hundreds of ISIS fighters being released overnight. These are all the consequences, and more. What are we going to do if a few days, a few weeks, or a month from now ISIS decides to deploy chemical weapons against Kurds or others in these areas? I mean, the parade of horribles, the possibilities are extraordinary. We could go on and on for a while. But that's why, among other reasons, it was a mistake. And when we came out and said it was a mistake, a lot of people said, well, what are you going to do about it? Don't just talk, act. And you know, it's difficult in an issue like this because Congress can stop wars, Congress can defund them, deauthorize actions, but Congress cannot force the commander-in-chief to stay in a military engagement. We cannot force the president to deploy troops or keep them somewhere. We can keep him from doing it, but we can't force him to do it. So our options in this field are limited, but we wanted to do something. We felt so strongly about this. And the response is Senate Bill 1, which is the item before us here today. And Senate Bill 1, as I said, combined these four elements of four bills that enjoy widespread bipartisan support. And you would think that in the midst of everything else that's going on, this would be a really good way to start the new Congress in foreign policy in an area that traditionally has not been partisan, or shouldn't have been. Combining these 4 bills into one, Senate Bill 1, which is what's before us today. And I want to briefly outline the 4 provisions that were combined into this bill. 2 of them deal directly with our ally in Israel. First, it says that makes very clear that it shall be the policy of the United States to provide assistance to the government of Israel in order to support funding for cooperative programs to develop, produce, and procure missile, rockets, projectiles, and other defense capabilities to help Israel meet its security needs and to help develop and enhance U.S. defense capabilities. That last line is important because much of the technology that's being innovated and developed by Israel to defend Israel can also be used by the United States to protect us from rocket attack there or when we're deployed abroad. And the reason why this is so critical is Hezbollah, who has a large presence in Syria and their base of operation in Lebanon, Hezbollah today is better funded, better equipped, more armaments than at any time in its history. We all recall the Hezbollah-Israel war from about over a decade and a half ago. The next Israel-Hezbollah war will be far deadlier and costly because Hezbollah no longer simply depends on Iran to provide them weapons, they make them themselves. Hezbollah no longer has a few rockets, it has enough to potentially overwhelm defenses. That means you could have the best missile defense system in the world. If you fire enough of them, eventually some of them will get through. And when they get through, in a small country like Israel, that at its narrowest point is only 9 miles wide, and it hits a population center and kills thousands of people, then you know we are facing a catastrophe, for Israel will respond to that sort of attack with overwhelming force. And this could spiral quickly out of control. And how could we wind up in that point? We could wind up in that point because now that the United States is leaving Syria, the Israelis are going to say, we're not going to allow Iran and Hezbollah to build up its presence. We are going to step up our military attacks inside of Syria. And it is possible that when they step it up, it is likely Iran and Hezbollah will respond by hitting back. And then Israel will hit back even harder. And at that point of escalation, you could easily see the missiles start coming out of Lebanon and into Israel, Israel responding with overwhelming force. And now we have a much broader conflict with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people whose lives are on the line. And so making it clear to Hezbollah or any enemy of Israel that the United States stands ready to equip them in the case of such a contingency is one of the best things we can do to prevent it from happening. If Israel's enemies believe that there is any doubt that the U.S. will step forward and help Israel resupply in case of such conflict, you have increased the probability that they will miscalculate and take such action. But if they know that we are committed to rearming Israel as often and as much as possible and necessary in order to help them defend themselves, then the chances of them attacking are diminished. And that's why this bill authorizes U.S. security assistance and foreign military financing to Israel at an amount no less than $3.3 billion a year for the next 10 years. By the way, this in essence is authorizing a memorandum of understanding signed between the Obama administration and Israel. We're authorizing that and putting it in the law. We're also authorizing the president to transfer precision-guided munitions to reserve stocks as needed for legitimate self-defense by Israel, meaning the world now knows and Israel's enemies now know that the United States has put aside in reserve munitions, precision-guided munitions that are there if Israel needs them for us to quickly transport it to them in case they come under attack and run low on the munitions they need to defend themselves. That's the first thing this bill does. Another thing it does, by the way, is combating BDS Act of 2019. For those who are not familiar with the BDS, it's boycott, divestment, and sanction. It is an effort, by and large, to punish Israel. And to punish Israel by convincing companies, international companies, and others to boycott doing business with Israel or Israeli entities, to divest of investments in Israel or with Israeli entities, and convincing governments to sanction Israel. And so this provision of the law does not does not outlaw boycott, divestment, and sanctions. If a United States company caves to this pressure and decides it's going to boycott or divest from Israel, they have the legal right to do so. This doesn't outlaw it. What it does say, however, it does say that if a state or local government decides that it's not going to do business, the government, is not going to issue contracts for goods or services with any company that is boycotting or divesting from Israel, they have a right to do that. I've heard the argument that this is about free speech. First of all, it's not about free speech. It's not about free speech, it's about foreign policy. And we'll talk about that more as the week goes on, but there's court cases out there that talk about well, this is not an effort to influence a domestic political debate or to speak or take action in the form of speech that influences a domestic political debate. This is about influencing the behavior of a foreign government. Influencing the behavior of a foreign government is foreign policy. And the courts give broad discretion to Congress and the President in the setting of our foreign policy. But put that aside for a moment. As I already told you, this doesn't in any way prevent anyone from participating in boycotting or divesting from Israel. All it says is that if you do, your clients in the form of state or local governments can boycott or divest you in return. Free speech is a two-way street. Beyond that, it makes it very clear in the law that nothing in this law should be construed, nothing, to violate anyone's First Amendment rights. So these are the two provisions that help Israel to prevent the sort of economic warfare that's being driven against them, and to make clear to their adversaries that the United States stands ready to resupply and strengthen Israel's ability to defend itself, in the hopes of not just helping Israel defend themselves if they come under attack, but frankly in the hopes of deterring an attack against Israel. And we do that by authorizing and putting into law the Memorandum of Understanding signed by the Obama administration in September of 2016. In addition, the third thing this bill does is Jordan. It deals with Jordan. Jordan is a U.S. ally. It is, by the way, a nation that, along with Egypt, has been a linchpin of Israel's security in the region. And it is also a nation that has faced an onslaught of refugees fleeing the conflict in Syria. They faced the threat from ISIS as well. And in Senate Bill 1, we reauthorized the U.S.-Jordan Defense Cooperation Act that was passed in 2015, an act that, among other things, includes Jordan on the list of countries that are eligible for certain streamlined defense sales, because Jordan itself is facing many of the same challenges, particularly because of our pullout from Syria. If you think the pullout from Syria, especially from southeastern Syria, is a good thing for Jordan, you're wrong. Once the U.S. leaves that area, the Iranian influence will grow, potentially the ISIS influence will grow. It'll become harder, not easier, on Jordan. This is the least we could do to strengthen an important ally in this region. The last piece is one that was sponsored by the chairman, or soon-to-be chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Risch. It's the Caesar-Syria Civilian Protection Act. And what it does, three principal things. It requires the Treasury to determine whether the Central Bank of Syria is a financial institution that launders money for the regime. I'm not sure it'll take them long to conclude that they are. But that opens the door for the second thing it does, and that is new sanctions on anyone who does business with or provides financing to the Syrian regime. It also, by the way, requires the administration to brief us here in Congress as part of our oversight role on what our strategy is to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian products and humanitarian assistance inside of Syria. And hopefully we'll be on this bill, but as the week goes on, I sadly will have to come to the floor and point out the horrifying atrocities that have been committed, that I believe 50 and 100 years from now people will look back at as one of the most horrifying things that have happened in this century. And the people who have done this should be held to account. And this law puts in place not just requiring the administration to tell us what they plan to do in the short term to help people to the extent possible, but also puts in place the ability to hold those who have done this responsible and accountable for what they did and what they continue to do. So I sincerely hope that we can get on this, because the American people, in the face of all of this noise that's out there, are in desperate need of reassurance that our republic still works, that at a minimum we can still agree on what we agree on. and that we don't use the pretext of a shutdown to shut down the Senate. As I remind everyone again, I know we have some new members, but this body passed unanimously a bill to fund the government. I have my views on this shutdown. I don't understand the objection to $5 billion of spending on border security. By the way, it's not $5 billion on a wall. It's $5 billion to fund the top 10 priorities of the border security plan, and included in those top 10 are strengthening existing walls and barriers and building some new ones, but it includes far more than just a wall. I remind many of my colleagues that were here in 2013 when we sponsored the Senate bill on immigration. We spent 4 times as much in that bill. We authorized 4 times as much in that bill for border security. But of course, the politics have changed, and so people's position on the issue of border security have changed. That said, I'm not in favor of government shutdowns. I don't think they make sense. And people that have nothing to do with this, they're not responsible for this, border agents, TSA employees, federal employees from these agencies all across the country, these people are missing paydays now. And their mortgage company doesn't care, and their credit card company doesn't care that there's a shutdown. They want to get paid, or they'll ruin your credit. And I hope we can find a resolution for them, but also for the country, without abandoning the reality that we need to deal with border security. Here's what I know, though. I don't believe that shutting down the Senate and not allowing us to move forward on something as important as Syria policy is the way to resolve a shutdown issue. You don't solve a shutdown with a shutdown. And shutting down the Senate, saying we're not doing anything here until we resolve this issue, is not a constructive approach, and it's certainly not the way to start this new Congress. At a time when I think the Senate serves a role as important as it has in 2 decades, this country needs a Senate that's capable of functioning and of agreeing on the things we agree on passing bills that have broad support and not allowing them to fall victim to debates that are unrelated to the issue at hand. And so I remind all of my colleagues who just 2 or 3 weeks ago joined me and others in criticizing the decision to draw down from Syria that there isn't a lot we can do in Congress to force the president to stay there. But there are some things we can do to reassure our allies in the region that at least here in the U.S. Senate, they have our support. That Israel and Jordan and the innocents who have been tortured and killed in Syria have our support. And we have a bill before the Senate, and Senate Bill 1, that does that. And I don't know why we would not move forward to at least debate it. The vote we're taking in about 60 minutes, 59 minutes from now, is not a vote to pass it. It is just a vote to begin debate on it. That's all it is. It's a vote to begin debate on it. And to not even allow debate to begin on something we basically largely agree on, that may make a lot of sense in the hallways here. It doesn't make a lot of sense to men and women back home who are already watching a government shutdown with disdain, and then on top of it, see not even the Senate can function in the midst of all of this. So I hope that whether it's today or later this week, that my colleagues across the aisle will reconsider their objection to even beginning debate, so we can get on this and we can get to work on behalf of the men and women of this country that we work for and represent. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Hi everyone, my name's Mike. I'm the creator of Mox News, and for the last 15 years I have been telling you that as long as I have the support of the community that I serve, Mox News will post videos forever. And that's the truth. As long as I have your support, no one could ever make me stop. Unfortunately, currently, less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% of Mox News viewers ever donate, tip, or contribute anything back. Again, let me make that really clear. Much less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% ever give anything back. And to those of you who have donated to Mox News, I want to thank you so much, because it's because of your generosity that we have been able to bring attention to important videos that millions and millions of eyes would have never seen. And I think that that's an amazing thing that we've been able to make happen together. And I can't thank you enough for helping me make that happen. So it's not too late. If you'd like to see Mox News covering the 2020 presidential election, if you can't imagine the 2020 presidential election without Mox News, please, there's still time. You can make a difference. It's easy to make a contribution, donation, or tip. You can go to moxnews.com, or in the text body of this video, there are clickable links to the Patreon page or to the PayPal page. And again, it should take less than 2 minutes to make a donation, and your donation can make a big difference. So I thank you all. Stay cool. One of these days this war is going to end, and it would be awesome if Mox News could be there to celebrate that day with you.